and you're just like trying to create something, and it's like you're just relentless and obsessed. We were relentless and obsessed at that time about creating something with this company. It's 1901 for baseball, or 1905 for baseball. It's like baseball is just emerging. That's how this sport felt.
Yeah.
And we didn't start in a time when it was booming. It was basically illegal everywhere. Like they couldn't throw UFC fights anywhere. They were trying to throw it, and I can remember events like trying to go off, and then all of a sudden they would say, oh no, the event's canceled. They can't throw this UFC. Early on, I was arrested at a place just because we were trying to sell our clothes, and they had raided it for a fight. It was like a local club.
Interesting.
And so it was very early in the whole mixed martial arts thing. And this is pre-2001, before Zuffa, the billionaires, Lorenzo Fertitta and Frank Fertitta and Dana White came and purchased it. So
was Dana White a billionaire before UFC?
No. He was like a trainer. I mean, this is the guy. He's self-made. He's totally self-made.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say like Dana. I thought like was just a hustler at the time, like almost doing like I think it was like a bellhop or something like that at the time. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I think when he was managing Tito Ortiz at the time, and he was like a boxing coach, but not like a big formal boxing coach, not like training people that were, he was kind of training like up and comers and just trying to get side-in jobs and stuff. But he was a hustler. He was from Boston, just, hardworking guy. Like you said, I think he was working at the front of a hotel or something. Yeah, it's like,
I think Sadie was doing like a bellhop job or something like that. Yeah.
So just a real hustler, and he just heard that the UFC, that Bob Merowitz, who owned it at the time, he was like an ex-TV executive or something, and we were working with him. So right out the gate, we were able to kind of get into, because the sport, I think it was the perfect storm, because if the UFC would have been big, it would have been impossible for us to get close to it.
Right.
But we right away in 1988 were able to start talking to the owners of the UFC, the people that were running the UFC, fighters who were fighting in the UFC, because we were training with some of those guys.
You were right in there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were guys that we knew were going to be fighting next month in the UFC, and we knew there was a guy, Eddie Millis, who was running a training facility in California called Shark Tank, and he was working a lot with this guy, Monty Cox, who was managing all the big fighters at the time. Pat Miletich, Jeremy Horn, Tim Sylvia, just really good guy, Matt Hughes, all the guys that were kind of at that era were the top of the top, the kings.
Yeah.
And in mixed martial arts, and were really, owned belts in different places.
Yeah.
And in his own event too, called Extreme Challenge. And we knew that some of them were going to be fighting in the UFC. So Eddie Mills connected us with Monty Cox, who was their manager. And in 1998, I believe November of 1998, we were in our very first UFC, where we were on Jeremy Horn.
Is this still in your face?
It is still in your face.
In your face. Okay, got it. All right,
this is early. We didn't get tap out till like 2006 or 7.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a long period of just hustling early on and just flying all over the country. We would go to different events in Hawaii and Indiana and Arizona, just doing these little tiny events where we'd set up a table just like this.
Yeah.
Throw some shirts up there, some hats,
booths,
and just try to make enough money to get us through to the next month. And if we did.
Now you're doing this full time. You're not doing anything in the police workforce.
Well, so I was. Okay. So at some point, Charles, probably about 2000, Charles quit. He quit the department. They were coming down on him for some use of force.
Yeah.
He had put some guy on the wall who would like spit in his face and kind of tuned him up a little bit. And so he just said, I'm tired of this. It's like you got these guys disrespecting you, spitting in your face, and then when you like come back at them, you end up in this use of force and being, they're like ready to fire him.
Yeah, right.
And they put him in like detention, where they put you in a place where you can't get close to anybody. So you're just like sitting in a pod for 8 hours, not being able to do anything.
Yeah.
And so he was just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And he goes, I'm going to turn in my badge today. I said, Charles, are you sure? Like, once you do this, there's no going back.
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, I think we can really make a run of this tap out. You know, I think we can. And I knew that we were doing like stuff that was good. I felt the energy of the whole sport and the brand.
I mean, it's electric how much people just have flocked towards this new sport, this brand new sport of fighting, you know, like, I mean, people are just talking about like learning about what jiu-jitsu even is, you know, and all that stuff. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think because at that time, especially because we started to get on a fighter, at least one fighter in every UFC. And back then it was like, they were more few and far between. It sometimes 6 months before another UFC was held. So, but we always made sure, let's get on a fighter every single time. We have to, if there's going to be UFC, we have to find some way to get to some fighter. And we created a couple good connections with people where we just kind of knew who was going to be fighting next in the UFC, and we would watch some tape on them or go to a show where they were going to be fighting at, and we'd watch them fight and be like, oh my gosh, this guy's incredible. Guys like Eugene Jackson, who at that time was just knocking people out, and he was just a kind of a street fighter who had got into, who was also a wrestler and was a natural MMA guy at the time. Today, I don't know how well he would fare in this type of sport. But at that time, this brawler who was relentless, who was a really good wrestler and training with really good wrestlers. And just had like boxing hands. He was killing people.
Kind of like a Kimbo Slice.
Yeah, exactly, but Kimbo. Even better. Just like at that time, just really good hands, relentless, and then also being an amazing wrestler. Like Kimbo, that's one thing that Kimbo had to learn. And became pretty good at it ultimately. But at that time, to have guys like that where we could sponsor, and we were paying them hardly anything, but they were getting paid hardly anything to fight. So they were fighting in the UFC for like $500. And then we were paying them $500 to fight in our clothes. So it was like they made $1,000. We were paying them as much as the UFC was at the time. And so for them, it was it was good for them. And it was good for us. And I think it was the perfect storm. Sometimes you find yourself in those perfect storms. You know, it's not like you weren't helped by somebody. You know, there's somebody up there watching over you maybe at the time, and you're just like trying to create something, and it's like you're just relentless and obsessed. We were relentless and obsessed at that time about creating something with this company. And we felt like we were really onto something, because everywhere we'd go, somebody would like, oh, what is that tap out? Is that UFC fighting stuff? And that whole tidal wave was creating itself, and we were just like holding on to it for dear life.
Damn, dude. So what was the real when like tap out really just blew up? Like when was the moment you felt that? Because it sounds like it was years of flying, of setting up booths, and just the hustle, the grind, just trying to get the name out there. When do you think it really took off?
Yeah, I mean, those whole early 2000s were a struggle. We were going to small events. Man.
I mean, we're talking about like almost a 10-year period of time, sounds like, because you're talking like 1998 and, up to 2000. Like, that's like a long time. I mean, just hustling,
Well, I think those little wins when it was easy to see, and I think we all have that, and I'm sure you have that in your business. When you all of a sudden getting on this fighter who's about to fight in the UFC, and you're like, oh my gosh, our stuff's gonna be on television right now, watched by, at that time it was like hundreds of thousands of people. And they're gonna be wearing our stuff and come out in this big, huge tap out shirt. I was just like, that was a win for us, and it keeps you going to those next moments. And so we just kept pushing for that. It was like, oh, we have a little win here. We used to call it throwing hand grenades. And that's why I actually put a hand grenade on my hand.
Oh, really?
Because it was just like, that was everything for us. It was like a little hand grenade here and a little hand grenade there. You're not going to, there's no way you're going to destroy, a whole enemy with one hand grenade. But if you throw a hand grenade here and you throw it there and you throw it here, you eventually throw enough hand grenades, you're going to win. You're going to win the war. And that's our thought. We were just like, well, let's keep being relentless. Let's keep finding ways to get in people's faces. And there wasn't the social media that you have today. If there was, we'd have been monsters on that. But it wasn't, we didn't have that. So it was like our outlet was being on these fighters who were representing the sport, because when you watch these guys were the lions of the sport, or of people, of the alphas, the alphas. They were the guys who people wanted to be or wanted to be like. And so we felt like our marketing idea, the big idea was, if we're on these guys that people want to emulate or be like, or be, fashion their personalities.
You were hitting
like,
influencer marketing before there was influencers.
I don't know, maybe. We just, being on those guys made sense because who wouldn't want to, I wanted to be those guys. So why wouldn't they want to be those guys?